perfectionism is that kind of high standardness, flawlessness. Everything has to be exactly as expected, accompanied by critical self-evaluations or the concern about how other people are grading you.
The question is from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Rob.
Hi, I'm Paul.
And the question, Paul, today is perfectionism a problem or is it an advantage?
Hasn't done me any harm.
Boom, boom.
Yay.
How long have you been waiting for that? See, I'm completely at a loss with this because there is nothing perfectionist about me whatsoever until I get told by other people, oh, yes, there is.
Yeah. As this is a short podcast, I'm going to move on from that statement.
Good. So, problem?
Yeah. Have you ever been in a hotel with you?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
You're a perfectionist.
And I just have high standards. I don't think I'm a perfectionist.
Well, that's
I'm
interesting.
intrigued
So what
about...
is perfectionism?
Yeah.
So perfectionism is that kind of high standardness.
Right.
So flawlessness. Everything has to be exactly as expected.
Yeah.
Accompanied by critical self-evaluations or the concern about how other people are grading you.
Oh,
so
okay.
it's a up here with the standards.
Yeah.
And also I just concerned that I'm, almost kind of never being able to achieve it. So I aim for everything, and it doesn't matter how good I am, it will never be good enough in my eyes,
right,
or your eyes,
right.
And that's an important thing because perfectionism there's different types of perfectionism,
right? Okay.
So we kind of talk about it as one thing, but it's not. There's three main types,
right,
and they're fundamentally different things in my mind,
right.
So there's what we call self-orientated perfectionism.
Yep.
I have very high standards. I can never meet them because I always want to do better than. It doesn't matter how good I do.
Right.
I'm going to go, but I could have done better.
Right. So that's a constant state of frustration.
Yeah. So I think, I think back to when I was running a sales team many years ago, and have people who have just smashed their target and then sit down and talk to you about the deal they lost. And you go, you smashed your target. Shut up. Go and have a beer. Celebrate. So there's that kind, self-orientated.
Right.
There's other orientated. I'm going to not use an example here, but I know you're going to have the same one in your mind as me. As somebody who puts standards on other people that are impossible to meet.
Right. And
then constantly tells them they're not good enough.
Okay. I can't think who you mean. But
yeah.
Go on. Yeah.
So, and I think that's the one we see a lot in the work we do, where you have a boss who's doing some sort of other orientated perfectionism.
Right.
And they might be doing it to themselves as well. They might have self-orientated at the same time. So it might be both are going on. It's not uncommon for self-orientated perfectionists to then become other-orientated perfectionists.
Right. Okay.
But they're placing these expectations on other people and then bringing them down in the process. But then there's socially prescribed perfectionism, where we work in environments that set standards that are unnecessarily high. And because we want to fit in with the people around us, we then work really hard to match a set of perceived standards that we think the group is aligning to.
Right.
Without ever questioning are they really doing, because everybody's going around going, I'm doing amazing stuff. Are we really doing amazing stuff?
Right.
And are the standards even meaningful? Are they relevant?
Right.
Which again, I think, I can think of a couple of, we use sales as an example more because it's my background. A couple of sales teams where I've seen that happening, where the team is kind of almost creating stories and narratives of how amazing they are and putting pressure on themselves and each other to live up to a set of amazingness that was never there in the first place. It's just all made up.
Right. Okay.
And that's kind of what we call socially prescribed perfectionism. So you can see different things playing out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So in all of those three then, is one or other of those more of a problem than helpful, or because we sort of talked about
is it a problem or an advantage? Yeah. And that's where it gets really interesting, because think about this, right? So imagine you're self-orientated,
right?
You set really high standards for yourself.
Yes.
You go into a career, any career.
Yeah.
At the start of your career, you've got really high standards, so you work really hard to do really high standards.
Right.
What happens?
You either meet them or you don't.
Yeah. And if you meet them, you get recognised for meeting them, and
right.
you probably get promoted.
Yes.
And so at the start of your career, in certain circumstances, self-orientated perfectionism kind of helps.
Yes.
Because if you think about the start of any career, the work you're expected to do is probably within your capability.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else is probably defining the overall standard. So
Right.
you're just putting a gloss on it.
Right.
And that perfectionism drives you to work hard, do more,
Mm-hmm.
strive more attention to detail. You achieve some stuff, you get recognised for that, you get paid more, you get promoted, they lift you up. And then you're into this Peter principle. That will keep happening until you can't do it.
Right.
You're promoted to your point of incompetence.
Yes.
And so often with perfectionism, for a long period of time, actually it drives you to achieve until it becomes the problem.
Right. Okay.
That makes sense?
Yes, it does. It does.
So I think, is it an advantage? Sometimes yes.
Yes.
But for a lot of people, eventually it then becomes the problem.
Right.
Because eventually you're at the point, as we all get to in our careers, where the goal is not, can I do all these things? Can I do them all to the right standard? The goal is to go, I've got a million things to do. I've got a fraction of the time and resource available to do it. How do I work out what to focus on, what to let go,
Right.
what good enough looks like? And of course, perfectionists struggle with all of that.
Of course, yeah, because good enough isn't part of the vocabulary.
No,
Anyway, so.
and focus isn't part of their vocabulary because I have to do it all. I can't do
Okay.
some of it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So that's in the first category. So that's something
Well, I
that
think
is
that, yeah.
self. But I mean, how does that play out with the projected one?
Oh, good question. I suspect they're the same sort of thing. When you start leading and managing, when you start working in an environment, holding people, being able to hold people to account, being able to drive good work across people, being able to help people lift and deliver higher standards probably makes you quite good to a point. Yeah, but then the point becomes when you're holding people to impossible standards, you're then destroying their confidence, you're bringing down their ability to work, you're probably bringing down the very productivity you're trying to drive up.
Well, I see another problem in that as well, and that is there must be a requirement for you to be a role model yourself of those standards, because otherwise you're putting a false standard on other people that you yourself are not exhibiting or
Yes.
holding yourself to account for. Because if somebody's putting some expectations on me, and let's just call that to be a higher achiever, to set higher standards and all the rest of it, and yet I don't see that behavior playing out from them as a role model, because I would naturally look to them as a role model.
Yes.
I see that as a problem.
Well, that is very demotivating, isn't it? Because if you've got somebody who is creating other-orientated perfectionism, holding everybody to standards that they know they've got no intention of doing themselves,
Yeah.
then there's like a hypocritical thing going on there.
Yes. Yeah.
And we hate that. And it's also unfair, and we hate that. So that causes a lot of conflict and stress in its own right. But the other side of it, I think of an occasion where I've worked for somebody for a small period of time earlier on in my career who was doing other-orientated perfectionism. So holding really high standards. And he would constantly feel like he had to critique everything everybody did.
Right.
And when I first went to work for him, it was a great learning curve because you get really intelligent feedback on some of the stuff you did.
Right.
But then after a while, you kind of realize that it quickly moved to ridiculous. And for me, just a little story here, for me, the point of no return for me was that I did a piece of work which ended up with a consulting report, and I got the feedback back, and it was about the formatting of the text.
Okay.
And how many spaces I'd left at end of sentences.
Okay.
And I mean, if it was spelling and grammar, I would have probably gone, oh, that's slightly helpful.
Right.
But you kind of go, all right, so we've now got to the point where there's nothing wrong with my recommendations. There's nothing wrong with the work I'm doing.
Yes.
Surprisingly for me, I've even got the spelling right. So you feel like you're picking up on an irrelevance.
Yes.
That then you've now created a standard where I've gone, anything I do in this environment, I can't possibly excel.
Yeah.
Because you're always going to find a reason why it's wrong.
Yeah.
Now, my reaction to that is I need to escape the environment. That's what I did in that environment. But other people then learn to be helpless and it affects so many other things. So at that point, perfectionism is really bad.
Well, I'm thinking of the instigator as well. So in that live example that you've given, that previous experience, the instigator of that demand on you is a micromanager.
Yes. Well, micromanagement, to a certain extent,
Is
is
perfectionism,
perfectionism.
yeah.
It's other-orientated perfectionism because it's basically saying, I can't trust anybody else to deliver this to the standards I want. And so I think that's where you get to that idea that if you've got an other-orientated perfectionist, they need to let go of the journey and start focusing on the destination.
Okay.
Set the goal and the expectation of what the outcome is you want, but allow people to work out how to get there themselves.
Yeah, nice.
And if they choose to go a different route,
Right.
it's a bit like, it's a crass example, but you'll get the point. It's a bit like you would never get in a cab and go, I need you to get to here. I want you to go up here. I want you to take that road, take the second left here.
Yeah, go the way that I want you to go.
Yeah. Because, particularly in a city like London,
Sure.
the cab driver's going to go, that's a ridiculous route. Let me take you a route I know to avoid the traffic there and, go through this cut through.
Sure.
But we do that other orientated perfectionists do that in life generally.
Okay. All right. And then what about the third category then? Problem and advantage.
Socially prescribed perfectionism to a certain thing. Socially prescribed standards are rules, are culture, and we know cultures are a really good thing.
Yeah.
So what we're really talking about here is where that element of the culture has become toxic.
Okay.
Has become, is placing expectations on people that are either unachievable or unrealistic or
wrong
or irrelevant.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
why are we working to this?
Yeah.
Or trying to.
Yeah. So it's where we're adding in work or doing things in the process that add nothing to the outcome.
Right.
And again, we've all come across those situations.
Yes.
We've probably all worked in those situations.
Yeah.
So that for me again is, don't confuse this kind of desire to excel and be good with perfectionism.
Right.
Because it's almost like it's the same curve, and at the point it ceases to be striving to do great and becomes absolutely black and white, I have to hit this standard or else.
Yeah.
That's the difference between driving to excel and perfectionist.
Right.
And driving to excel is highly admirable and a really good trait and causes us to do great work and drive ourselves and grow and achieve more.
Right.
And perfectionism is the problem bit of it.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's a very fine line between the two.
Okay.
And, what I might see as ambition and drive, you might see as perfectionism.
Right. Okay. So the other thing that I was intrigued about, and I think from your description, it goes across all three of these bands or categories, is a possible sort of interference, if you like, with perfectionist traits, is on decision making. Because there's a tendency to overanalyze stuff and then therefore slow down decision making or get in the way of decision making.
Yeah.
If you are a perfectionist or if you have a perfectionist tendency.
Yeah, because if you're a perfectionist, you're basically going,
nothing's ever good enough.
But you're also going, I have to get these decisions right.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And that, if you just think about that in the current climate, getting a decision right is almost an impossible standard.
Yeah.
Because most of the decisions you make, there is no right answer.
Right.
There is least worst answers and more worst answers.
Yeah.
There is, all right, we'll do this and we'll see what happens because I'm not going to actually get half the information that I need to make the decision until I make the decision.
Yeah, yeah.
There's all those kind of scenarios coming out. And that's where you kind of go, perfectionists want, sort of struggle a little bit with black and white thinking. They want the world to be very simple. There is a right answer to this. There is a right standard to this. There is a clearly defined way of doing something.
Right.
And of course that's a false assumption.
Sure. So there's a fear in amongst all of that of getting it wrong. I might make the wrong choice. I might make the wrong decision.
Yeah, yeah. And I think so perfectionist traits can cause decision paralysis.
Right.
Because it's like, well, I need these 10 bits of information to make a decision. I've got 5 of them. I now can't make a decision.
Right.
I have to wait. Well, actually, you might have to accept the other 5 are never coming.
Yeah. And it's interesting, you talk about black and white thinking. So that must then have a big impact on creativity, innovation, flexibility around thinking.
Yes, I think there's a huge risk that perfectionism can drive down productivity, it can drive down creativity, it can close down ideas.
Right.
because it's creating ridiculously high standards of everything
Right.
and draining confidence because
Okay.
it's focusing on the bit you can't do, not the bit you can.
Okay.
So you're constantly coming back and going, I've done all these things, but I wasn't good enough because of this last little bit.
Right.
Without going, there were 10 things I could do. I did 8 of them. 6 of them were really important. 2 of them were trivial, and the 2 I didn't do were irrelevant.
Right.
You know, what you're doing is going, but I didn't do all 10.
So how can we best help a perfectionist then to get them to understand what good enough is and
Cool.
accept that?
I'm glad you asked that. Because I knew you were going to ask this question, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I've come up with there's kind of 4 areas to think about.
Right.
So the first one, right in our sweet spot, realistic goals.
Okay.
Right. So when we teach goal setting, and we've talked about this probably on 2 or 3 podcasts in the past.
Yeah.
It's the A in smart and achievable and this realistic thing, and relevance. What is it you actually need?
Right.
Are you setting goals that are way above the requirement?
Right. Okay.
You
So that means let's be really careful about the measure of
Yeah.
the goal, the timeline of that goal,
Yep.
and the relevance of that goal.
Cool. Yeah, I go, you be absolutely clear about what you want
Yeah.
and be absolutely clear about what good looks like. Because perfectionists, when you ask them to describe what good looks like, they go on and on and on and on and on. And
Do you know, I'm just trying to think if I know any
do you need
perfectionists.
any of that stuff.
Right.
What is it you actually need?
Yes.
And it's really interesting if you get it with a perfectionist and go, all right, what does a minimal viable product look like? They can't do it. They can't take bits out of it.
Right.
And again, I've had an experience.
Okay. Cool. Number 1. What else?
Mistakes. Become more comfortable with the idea that you're going to make mistakes. Mistakes are inevitable. They're part of life. And if you can reframe them as part of learning and growth,
Yes.
they become less scary.
Right. Okay.
So if you're terrified of mistakes, as perfectionists often are,
Yeah.
you can't break the perfectionist trait
Right.
because you're again black and white thinking. Unless it's perfect, it's wrong.
Right.
Well, you go, if it kind of works, it could be right.
Yeah. Okay.
Big picture thinking,
Right.
right? So go, what is the point of this? Where are we going? Why are we doing these things?
Yeah.
How does it fit with everything else?
Yeah. Which comes back to the relevance thing again,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
So if you're looking from the top down, actually some of the things that you're focused on as being really important aren't important at all.
Right.
And so it reduces the perfectionism.
Okay.
And then the last one, if you are a perfectionist or you're working with a perfectionist, you do need to challenge some of the beliefs they have about standards and expectations and what's required.
Right.
Because they'll have some beliefs about the recent example, and maybe you've come across this, working with somebody who's doing a presentation to a senior group of people, and their expectation is that they should have a slide that covers every possible scenario.
Yeah.
And you just have to challenge that and go, is that even possible?
Yeah.
How do you know what abstract question somebody's going to ask?
Sure.
Now, having a slide on the common scenarios,
Yes.
10 or 20 things that could be reasonably asked but aren't in your main talk. I get that. That's the difference between drive.
Yeah.
Let me think of the 10 or 20 things that might really come up. I'll make sure I've got something to cover those.
Right.
Perfectionism is I've got to cover them all. And if somebody asks something I haven't thought about, I am therefore no good.
Yeah.
And I've got this wrong.
Yeah.
Well, that's the difference.
Right.
So
Okay.
challenge some of those beliefs.
Yeah.
So realistic goals, become comfortable with mistakes, some big picture thinking, and challenge the beliefs.
Great.
That's my 4 tips for dealing with perfectionism.
Next time on The Question Is.
Imagine that time in history, and it probably is still true, where people had to lie about themselves because their authentic self wasn't accepted. I mean, just imagine how much effort that must have taken to go and do good work every day and hide yourself.
To find out how Thinking Focus can unlock the potential within your organization, go to www.thinkingfocus.com, where you'll discover more about the work we do, helping our clients increase productivity and enable change.